Welcome to episode 217 of Real Health Radio. You can find the show notes and links talked about as part of this episode at 7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/217. For the last little while, I've been starting the show talking about the fact that 7 Health is taking on new clients. And at the time of recording this intro, we have just one spot left. There are a handful of areas that I regularly work on with clients. One of the biggest is helping women to get their periods back, so recovery from hypothalamic amenorrhea or HA, and I've had clients regain their period after it being absent for 10 or even 20 years, often after being told that it would never happen again, or clients becoming pregnant who'd almost given up hope of it ever happening. I've also worked with clients along the disordered eating and eating disorder spectrum, and many clients use the term quasi-recovery to describe where they're at, because things are better than where they were when they're at their worst, but they're still far away from being at that place of freedom that they so crave. I believe in full recovery, and I've had many clients who've had multiple stays at inpatient facilities where nothing worked, but through working together, they've got to a place of recovery. Transitioning out of dieting is another big one, and clients have had years or decades of dieting and they just know that it doesn't work, but they're really struggling to figure out how to eat and how to live without dieting. And then body shame and hatred and a struggle with body acceptance is the final common area. And they want to get past this and be able to be present in their life and stop putting things on hold, but they're unsure of how to even start. And in all of these scenarios, I use the core components of what 7 Health is about, which is science and compassion. We focus on physiology, so understanding how the body works and how to best support it, and also on psychology, so understanding the mental and emotional side and uncovering someone's identity and values and priorities and the traits and beliefs and how these can either be helping or hindering change. And it's these kinds of clients that make up the bulk of the practice, and I'm very good at guiding and supporting people through this process. So if any of these scenarios sound like you and you'd like help, then please get in contact. You can head over to 7-health.com/help, so HELP, and you can read about how I work with clients and apply for a free initial chat. And this will be the last time I'm starting with clients in 2020, and as I said at the start, there's just one spot left. So if you're wanting help, then please reach out. The link again is 7-health.com/help, and I'll also include that in the show notes. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. So today it's another guest interview, and my guest today is Victoria Welsby. So Victoria is a world-leading expert on body image and confidence, a TEDx speaker and best-selling author. She went from being homeless, abused with self-esteem that was achingly low, into the courageous, fat activist and change maker she is today. Victoria helps people fall in love with themselves and is dedicated to shifting the way society views fat bodies. So I've been aware of Victoria for a while now. It must have been a year ago or maybe even 2 years ago that I first watched her TEDx talk. And more recently, I started to check out her podcast and really liked the information she's putting out. And one of her recent interviews or episodes, not interviews, one of her recent episodes was about the similarities between cults and diet culture. And as I mentioned in the show, this is a topic I'd been wanting to do a show on myself for a really long time, and talking about cults and eating disorders. And so after hearing this episode, I reached out to her and asked Victoria to come on the show. So as part of this episode, we chat about Victoria's background and the many difficulties that occurred. So poverty and trauma, abusive relationships, homelessness and low self-esteem. We talk about how she was able to turn things around and the different things that helped. So therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT and eye movement desensitization reprocessing, so EMDR, different jobs and the experiences through these jobs that helped her, and then also moving from the UK to Canada. We chat about her TEDx talk and how this then led on to her appearing in the BBC documentary, Who Are You Calling Fat? And then we talk about cults and the similarities between them with diet culture and also with eating disorders. There's quite a lot of swearing in this one, mostly from Victoria, so just warning you. This episode also ended rather abruptly. So while everything seemed fine for the whole conversation, right at the end, the internet gods cut things off. And we tried to reconnect to record the ending and talk about some extra points, but we just simply couldn't get it to work. So I'll be reading out Victoria's contacts on her behalf. So that is it for the intro. Here is my conversation with Victoria Welsby. Hey, Victoria, welcome to Real Hearts Radio. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Super excited to chat about some juicy stuff today.
Yeah, so you have a wonderful podcast called Fierce Fatty, and you're up to 50 odd episodes. And
I am.
I think all of them, or nearly all of them, are solo shows where you touch on various topics, and some are personal, covering aspects of your life and backstory. And I mean, I think all of them are personal, and you share your story, but some of them are where that is sort of the only aspect of it. And then there's others that are dealing with specific topic areas. And so for today, I want to cover some of those topics that you touch on as part of the show.
It sounds like an amazing idea.
Yeah. So can you talk about your childhood? You grew up in Peterborough. Is that right?
Yeah. So I grew up in the UK in a place called Peterborough. Most people won't know where it is, but it's an hour outside London. It's a bit of a dump. I'm sorry if you live in Peterborough. You probably agree with me. But I lived in a very, very poor area, come from a poor family, grew up in poverty, and my start in life was quite interesting, and my beliefs about my body led me into accepting different situations which were not so great.
So do you want to, when you say your start in life was interesting, so give us a little more detail on that.
Yeah, so I was always, I wouldn't say I was fat when I was a young kid. I was more ever so slightly plump, like joyously chubby, like, you know, even if I was fat, I'd still be joyously lovely. But I was a kind of slightly chubby, but not really child. And growing up in a household where my mum, who is a small lady, 5'2", little Irish lady, and she said that her body was bad. And so I viewed my body as an extension of her body. Therefore, my body was bad because it was fat, and her engaging in kind of the binge restrict cycle taught me a lot about food. On top of that, living in poverty, we didn't often have access to food. And so when it did come into the house, it was kind of like, oh, food, but don't eat it because it needs to last. But also, food is so wonderful. And I got a lot of love and praise and the reward being food. So my dad was an alcoholic, and that added another layer on to that. And by the time I was 17, I had really, really, really low self-esteem. I thought that I was absolutely out of control with food. I would fantasize about getting surgery to reduce my stomach and become thin, and thought, you know, nothing is going to come to me in life. And at that time, my mum moved away from Peterborough and moved back to Ireland, where she's from. My dad was an alcoholic still, and I became homeless. And so at the age of 17, I lived in a shelter for young adults who were homeless. And
Did your mum know that you were going to become homeless, or had you told her, I've got these other arrangements, and then that fell through, or what?
It was a kind of a little bit of both. Like I was to make up for my fatness in my life as a child, I was an overachiever. I was very good. I was very responsible. And so when my mum said, I'm going to move back to Ireland, I was like, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'll find somewhere to live. And my mum, it was a very kind of chaotic time in her life. And I think she kind of just said, okay, that's fine. And in reality, being 17, legally, I wasn't allowed to rent anywhere. I worked as a cleaner after school. And so I had only a few pounds to my name anyway, so I couldn't afford to rent anywhere. And I didn't tell any of my friends at school. And so it wasn't like I would could sleep on the sofa of a friend. And so she I think if she looked into it, she would have known, or if she was capable, but at that time she wasn't. And my dad wasn't capable of being there for me either. And so it was kind of, in my mind, it wasn't that big a deal. Like being homeless, someone like me, someone who's so, disgusting and ugly and fat and horrible. So it didn't seem like a big deal to me, but it was actually a big deal to me at the time.
Yeah. And I guess if you said, and I don't know if you said this already, or it's just from the reading I've done and listening to your podcast, where like growing up in poverty, was there, well, I'm seeing other people around me. I know that there is homelessness amongst people in this area. So I don't know, it somewhat normalized it more.
In regards to, I didn't see people in my area becoming homeless.
Okay.
I think I was still a bit too young for that, but I knew the trajectory of my life was going to be, not that good because of the area that I was in. But I always had kind of like a little spark to say inside me that was kind of like, no, you can do better than this. But it was really deep down somewhere in me. But being homeless, because I hadn't seen it, but it was still kind of not that surprising.
Okay. Yeah. And so, you're homeless at 17, and where do things go from there?
Well, they went from that to worse, because I met a 30-year-old guy, and still 17, met him at the club, and he was super creepy. Now I can say he was super creepy, but at the time I was like, oh my God, anyone is interested in me. A human man is interested in me. Turned out that he was an alcoholic. So I was the perfect target, having an alcoholic father. And he went on to abuse me in every way that someone can be abused. And one way that I was with him for 2 years, one way that he really wore down any kind of self-esteem that I did have was to manipulate me with food and tell me what I was allowed to eat, when I was allowed to eat, monitoring my weight. And at the time I thought, oh, he's such a good guy. Like, I can't be controlled around food because I just want to eat it all. And he loves me so much that he is putting me on this diet because he cares about my health and he wants me to be healthy and happy. Yeah. And but it wasn't. It was just straight up abuse. And that extreme restrictive diet that he put me on turned my disordered eating into what I would say was an undiagnosed eating disorder, binge eating disorder. But to me, this was, look, see, you're so out of control. You need someone to teach you how to eat and to take food away from you because you're so greedy that you would lie to your boyfriend and sneak food behind his back and all that type of stuff.
And had you done something like Weight Watchers before? I mean, it sounds like it's like the extreme version of Weight Watchers, where you have someone like micromanaging your every move.
I hadn't at that point. I had done like kind of random diets that I thought was a diet before. I did Weight Watchers after another relationship because I was like, I'm going to be happy. And I did Weight Watchers. But up until then, no, I hadn't. But it is like an extreme kind of version of, it's a straight up abuse. It's just abuse. Yeah, definitely.
And so what point was there red flags that were then being raised for you? Like, was it early on that there were red flags and you're like in this position where if I leave this guy, I'm going to be homeless again. And it's kind of like, I don't really have any other options, or actually it took a really long time for you to see this as a problem?
It took a very, very long time for me to see it was a problem. And even after I left him, I didn't think that what he did to me was abuse, even though he abused me in every way that you can be abused. Because I saw the way that my dad behaved, and he was an alcoholic, he was also a bit of a bully, very domineering. My mum is very kind of soft-spoken and agreeable. And I saw this dynamic of what a woman is in a relationship and what a man is. And so the way that he behaved, telling me what to do and being an alcoholic himself, didn't seem that alarming. I just thought, I'm going to fix him. I'm going to love him so much that he's going to be cured from this alcoholism. And if he's not an alcoholic, then he'll be a really nice person. Turns out that he was just a massive dick. You know, if he was drunk or if he was sober, he was just a bad person. But I knew that I didn't feel good with him, but I didn't really know why. So there were things that I was like, this doesn't make me feel good, but it's not necessarily his fault, which now I'm like, it's his fault. Like, oh my God. Yeah. So it, not even in the relationship, because I was that kind of downtrodden or low self-esteem. I thought it was okay to behave in the ways that he was behaving. Yeah.
And so how did you then extricate yourself from that?
Well, luckily, when I went to university, and I stayed in my hometown to go to university, but I got a job working at a bar. I was so shy. Like when customers would come in, I would hide behind the bar and wait for a colleague to serve them because I was too shy to talk to people. So that's how shy I was. Eventually, I had to serve customers and talk to people, and it was like a lively bar on a Saturday night. And that helped improve my communication skills and being able to talk to people. And I made new friends. And one of the friends I made could kind of tell that there was, that my boyfriend was a bit of a knob, and he encouraged me, and he was like, it's not okay to feel like that, and talk to me about what an abusive relationship is, and things like that. And I, through him, got the courage to leave this guy. And so I wrote him a letter and put it in the house that we shared through the door, and just ran away. And then the guy chased me through the streets because he was, scary, violent individual. And that was really difficult because I couldn't really get any of my stuff, and so I lost a lot of my belongings. And and he terrorized me, and did all the normal things that abusers do when someone leaves. And it was very dangerous and scary, and eventually got a restraining order against him, and eventually then left the UK, not to get away from him, but that's what happened.
Right. And through all this, did you have friends, or was it kind of very isolating it was just like you and this guy, and everything else was shut out?
Yeah, no, I did have a lot of friends. Like I was super, popular, and people loved me, and I was very like happy-go-lucky and that type of thing. But I hid everything. So if people said, who's your boyfriend? I'd be like, oh, he's great, blah blah blah. And if he was drunk, I would make excuses for him. And if people were like, why does he smell of like vodka at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning? I'd be like, oh, it's whatever, and would make excuses and never told anyone what was going on, even like my best friend.
And is that the same as well with your like dieting history? Was dieting this thing that you did? And I know it was then imposed when he became involved, but like before that, was dieting something that you did just on your own and you didn't tell people about it, or there was some kind of camaraderie that you were doing it with friends or with other people?
Yeah, no, I wanted people to know that I was trying to become a better person, aka reducing my body size. So anytime I did make efforts to become smaller, I would be like, tell everyone. I'd want everyone to know, by the way, I know that I'm a piece of shit because I have a fat body and I'm doing something about it. Therefore, I'm, I have a redeemable qualities about me because I am dieting. So yeah, no, I was very vocal about that.
Okay. And was it something that was done en masse in terms of, were there lots of people who were in a similar situation who were also dieting, or you were kind of on the fringes and not many people were participating?
In my earlier life, it was just me and, my family kind of thing. And then when I got into like a structured program, it was, my boyfriend at the time, I forced him to come along, even though he wasn't fat, and so I involved him, and it was just me, really. But I would talk to friends about it, and it was pretty much just me.
Yeah, and I remember there was some reason that you got CBT when you were a child. Can you kind of remind me of that and just talk a little about that experience?
Yeah, so when I was living in a very dangerous neighborhood, there was a local paedophile that would just hang around, and he targeted me. And what he would do is he would indecently expose himself while I was playing in the garden, or when I was, just walking around in the streets playing on my own or with my friends. And that caused me to have a great deal of trauma and a massive amount of fear of being in my house, which should be somewhere that's safe.
Yeah.
Being anywhere near my garden, and so the back side of my house was really, really, really scary, and I couldn't be in a room on my own. I couldn't ever have the light off. I couldn't even go to the toilet on my own because I was so afraid to even flush the toilet. I was that terrified, and that went on for a while. And I don't know how this happened, but my mum took me to the doctor and said, there's something clearly going on with her, and they got me into therapy. And at the time, that was probably the 90s, therapy was not heard of, it was kind of, if there's something wrong with you, then you're stuck with it. So I feel like I was so lucky that I was able to go through that. And that was a shit time, but the therapy really, really helped me to show me that I can overcome very, very difficult situations. Like the fear that I had in me was so, so powerful, but with slow steps forward and building trust and slowly having little moments of bravery, I could turn things around. So I had that little, like I mentioned before, that little spark in me, that little thing that said, that belief that I could turn things around if they were really shit. That was in me.
Yeah. And at what age was that you had the CBT?
I was in primary school, and I think I was in about year 5. So that's maybe 8 years old. Yeah.
Okay. Which is just interesting in the sense that I remember it mustn't have been until I was probably 18 or 19, or it might have even been when I moved to the UK, at 21 or 22, that I started reading more around psychology and got in probably more into Tony Robbins and that kind of thing to start with, but starting to understand the mind and having an internal dialogue and how those things can then affect your emotions. And so for you to have CBT when you're at such a young age, and then to know that information from age 8 onwards, yeah, I know it's a horrible way for you to be exposed to that, but I guess it's advantageous in some ways to have had that experience of CBT and just start to get a sense of what's going on in your mind from that very young age.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel fortunate that I got therapy, because imagine if I didn't. Oh my gosh, I'd still be having to get someone to flush the toilet for me.
Yeah. And so there was another incident as well that then led you to get EMDR, with you being knocked off your bike. So yeah, can you talk a little about that, and also just a little about EMDR, because I haven't covered it before on the podcast, and so yeah, it'd definitely be something that I want to delve into.
Yeah. Oh, I love EMDR. Oh, give me some EMDR. So EMDR stands for eye movement. I can never say this word. Desensitization reprogramming. Say the word for me.
Desensitization.
Thank you. It's the word ammunition. For years, I couldn't say ammunition, and I'd be like, oh. Anyway, so EMDR. I was on my bicycle. Someone hit me from behind, and I was then afraid to ride my bicycle. I was in my 20s, early 20s, 19, 20, something that age. And so I was afraid to ride my bicycle. And so the insurance company said, oh, you should go to therapy. And I thought, yeah, why not? It's free. I didn't think it was that big a deal. And so the therapist was like a trauma therapist. And he was like, we're going to try this thing where we do these really weird things. And I was like, I ain't paying for it, so I don't care. Like, do what you want. And so what he did is he got this this block of LED lights, and the lights would flash from left to right. And then he had headphones on me, and the headphones would beep left to right in concurrence with the lights going left to right. And then he had me hold pulses in my hand, and it would buzz left, right. And I'd just be watching this light, and my eyes would be going left to right, kind of like what, a hypnotist does.
Yeah.
And what is happening...
With your eyes open or your eyes closed?
Eyes open. And you can do it there's lots of different ways to do it. So later on, I went to another therapist who I did a lot of processing my trauma with, and she just tapped my knee, and I closed my eyes. But this one was eyes open. And what it's doing is it's getting you into a state where when you're falling asleep, when you're in that rapid eye movement, REM, you're accessing different parts of your brain, and you're processing what happened during the day, and your brain is categorizing it as, let's put that into a memory that we don't need to remember. Like, we don't need to know what we had for breakfast 17 years ago on a Monday. Like, forget about that. But 17 years ago on a Monday, I had this terrible traumatic thing that happened. I'm going to take that memory and put it in a different part of my brain as a current threat, because that was really scary. And so you're getting to a point where you're in a more influential state, because you're able to kind of like process these memories and these traumas a little bit better. And then what the therapist does is then talk to you about the thing that happened, and give you alternative scenarios of what could happen. Like, what could happen if you rode your bike and you successfully navigated a roundabout and you weren't hit? And you just imagine that happening. Or you imagine, because I was doing a lot with the abuse of my boyfriend, imagine feeling safe and feeling, calm and things like that. And it helps process these current threats and put them into the memory side of your brain, so that you no longer have to constantly think about it and have these big triggers and it rule your life. And because my trauma with riding my bike was a very small trauma compared to the other things that I'd experienced, within 3 sessions, I was like, going out there doing wheelies and, all sorts, because I wasn't scared anymore. And he was like, well, you got 10 sessions. What else do you want to do? And I was like, well, I kind of get travel sickness. And he's like, yeah, let's do travel sickness. And we spoke about other things. And anyway, and so then years later, when I realized that I had some really serious, PTSD, I thought, I wonder if we can do some EMDR on it. And after years of previously doing just CBT, the EMDR it feels like a miracle, because you're able to process these things that have been in your brain bothering you for years and years and years with just a few sessions. It's so wonderful. I want everyone to know about EMDR and try it if you have trauma.
Did your experience, so when you spoke to the person who did the EMDR to start with when you're in the UK, and then later on when you were doing it for more of the heavy duty trauma, were you someone who responded pretty well? Were you someone who was kind of average? Just because you've, like, when I hear your story talking about this, you seem like someone who's responded very quickly to this. And so I'm just trying to get a sense, is that just normal?
Well, at the time when I was doing the first one, I was very closed off. I couldn't talk about anything. The therapist just said, tell me about your family unit. Do you have a mum and a dad? And I was like, yeah, I have a mum and a dad. And I just burst out crying because I couldn't even say the words mum and dad. And he's like, what's wrong with you, sort of thing. He didn't say it like that, but I was like, oh. And I wouldn't say anything at all. I was very closed off and very guarded about my trauma. And so, but with the bike trauma, I was like, whatever, like, it's just a bike, I don't care. So I was probably very open. I didn't really believe that what he was doing was going to do anything. I thought it sounds a bit quacky, so I was like, whatever. But I think when I went second time, I was a lot more open to discuss these things, and so I think I am a good, quote unquote, good therapy goer,
Okay.
But I don't think anything special or anything, bad or anything like that.
Yeah, I just, so that for people who are listening, maybe get a sense of like how quickly it's meant to work on the average. Have you read? Oh, go on.
Well, when I went to my therapist for the big trauma, and I said to her on the first session, I was like, well, how long is it going to take to, quote unquote, fix me? Because I was like, I don't want to pay for these sessions, like, because they're expensive. And she's like, I don't know, like 10 sessions. And within 10 sessions, there was a massive difference. Now, I still have that therapist to this day. We're no longer going to do EMDR because it's like, the way I see it is that you always need a therapist. You don't need to see him every day, but because you're a human being and you have a brain the same way you need a doctor. But you can. The thing is with EMDR, it processes things way quicker than traditional types of therapy. And not that it's a brand new thing. It's been around for years now, but people will get quick results. And so, yeah, like my therapist says, maybe 10 sessions, ? And 10 years later, you'll still be there.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, have you read Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker?
No.
Okay, so it's one of my favorite books from last year, really fascinating, just looking at all of the different aspects around sleep and what it does and why it's helpful. And one of the things that he talked about in that was with PTSD, with normal everyday struggles and difficulties, when you go to sleep, the REM sleep is the part that's actually quite soothing, and it's the thing that then is able to tag those memories and to actually kind of deal with them in a way so that after some breakup or after some heartache or some difficult conversation, after a number of days of sleeping, you're able to find that you're getting over it. And the problem with PTSD is that it is such an intense experience that and there's lots of different reasons for this, but one of them is that the stress hormones are then so high that your REM sleep is then just not effective at being able to tag that memory correctly and then to be able to process it. So it just stays there as if it was on day one, even if you're 10 years, 20 years later. And he talked about in the book that they were able to give some medication that was able to bring down the adrenaline levels, I think it was adrenaline, and that then allowed the REM sleep to be able to help in PTSD.
Oh, that's really cool.
And just the way that you were then talking about in terms of the lights and the eye movement and basically starting to change the memory and change the stress levels that are associated with the trauma, then allows your body to be able to tag and process it. So yeah, I can see a lot of overlap between the MDR and then REM sleep when it's working as effectively as it should be.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Yeah, and a lot of my trauma would come out in my dreams because I'd be having nightmares every single night, and I guess because my brain wasn't processing it.
Yeah, and so in a sense, you're like, oh, okay. Well, if I'm dreaming about it in kind of ordinary life, if you're dreaming about it, then that should be part of the processing piece. But if there's that stress that is then attached to it, it just doesn't let you be able to tag it properly and move it to where it should be.
Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker. I'm going to read it.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, he does. The disclaimer is there's mentions of obesity and there's bits that I don't necessarily agree with, but on the whole, he does a really good job at explaining why we sleep, all of the processes that go into it. I haven't had a client yet who's read that book who hasn't then been like, okay, I need to reprioritize sleep. Like it really does sort of fundamentally shift how you think about sleep. And I mean, for a long time, I've really talked about sleep as being like one of the real cornerstones to good health and talking about physical health, mental health, emotional health. And that book is really just a treaty towards that and why it should be prioritized in a way that it really isn't in our society. And often because it's out of someone's control, they're working two jobs, there's all this stress, etc. But we focus on so many areas that we kind of deem important. And I think sleep is often one of those ones that gets missed off or is left behind, or it doesn't get the same attention when actually it's probably ranking above most things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely need more evidence to support me sleeping 75 hours a day. So thank you, Chris.
Nice. And so I know you said you were working in a bar at some point, and what other work were you doing before you moved over to Canada?
I then worked in a call center, which was horrifying for my low self-esteem, but also good because I had to talk to human beings and people who were angry and stuff. And then I went into recruitment, which was also horrifying because I had to speak to people who I thought were important human beings, like CEOs of companies, which was also good for my self-esteem. And then, I moved to Canada being a recruitment consultant.
Okay. And I'm quite a big one when working with clients to do exposure therapy of sorts. So if there's something you fear, okay, let's do it in small doses multiple times until you get over it. And it sounds from everything you described there is like your job career was sort of exposure therapy to build up your confidence and your esteem.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's 100%. If I hadn't done those jobs where I had to speak to other human beings, I would be still very, very, very shy. And I'm so pleased that I did, because I learned how to talk to other humans, even though they were really shit jobs, because it was, not a good environment, but still it taught me a lot of things about speaking,
Yeah. Do you think you are someone who is naturally shy, or it was more a matter of upbringing and experiences that then meant that the shyness was more of a defensive mechanism?
Yeah, it was a learned behavior. I'm an extrovert. I like to think that I'm an introvert because I like watching staying in and things like that, but I am an extrovert. But the way that I was brought up, my mum is very quiet and shy, and she would always be like, don't raise your voices, don't speak up. And when she would speak to people, she would stumble over her words and sometimes not be able to speak. And, don't let people see you or notice you, just be quiet. And it was a learned behavior, just be quiet because what you've got to say isn't important. Your voice doesn't matter. Just don't be an inconvenience for other people. And a great way to do that is to be invisible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. And so what then prompted your move to Canada?
Oh, another juicy story. What prompted my move was that, so I was dating this guy and I was like, he is my future husband. He is the most amazing, incredible human being ever. Now, because I'm such a massive geek around like true crime and psychology and all that type of stuff, now I realize that he was actually a narcissist. But I was in the love bombing stage and the fairy tale stage. I was with him, like it was 10 months in the relationship. But one day I found out that he had 3 other full-time girlfriends. And so I actually messaged one of the girlfriends and was like, who are you? And she was like, I'm his girlfriend. And I was like, she was like, who are you? And I'm like, his girlfriend. And so then she came round to his house and we were like, oh my God. And then we messaged the other girlfriend. And
so had you got his phone or his email?
I was in his laptop. I was on it. He had gone to play rugby for the day somewhere else. And I had this sneaking suspicion. And it wasn't like, I wouldn't do this now because I wouldn't think it was appropriate. But then I hacked into his Facebook account. As I went into his Facebook account and looked at his messages. And there was a message there from this girl who I recognized the name because he said, I've got this psycho ex-girlfriend and she's really, really like stalking me. And it was a message saying, are you okay? Where are you, sort of thing. And I was like, that doesn't sound psycho to me. And so I messaged her and yeah, she was She was like, what's going on? And so there was 4 of us. Girlfriend 4 didn't believe us. She had just started dating him, and she was like, no, don't say that about my boyfriend, he's so lovely. And we're like, well, we've got all the evidence you want. And we became friends. And
all 4 of you, or just the 3?
No, the 3. Number 4 never believed us, and so she probably found him out. But and that was actually a big changing point, because I thought, fuck it, what am I doing? I'm just gonna run away and escape to Canada. My sister had moved there. I give up on England. Like, all of this bad stuff has happened. But also it was a changing point, because I saw these other girlfriends, and they were, we are so similar. We have the same personalities. We all look the same. And I could see that they were beautiful and smart and funny and accomplished and really great catches. And then I looked at myself and I was like, but why would he date me? Like, I'm fat and, unattractive, and, maybe I'm funny sometimes, but really, I'm pretty ugly. And I thought, well, before I thought he was being a good guy. And after I discovered that he wasn't a good guy, it made me realize that he wasn't. He also saw in me that I was beautiful and accomplished and charming and blah, blah, blah. And so I realized in that moment that I had a flawed view of myself. It wasn't fact that I was repulsive because I had a fat body. And that really was the stage where I thought, okay, something's going on in my brain. I need to work on it here, because it's not my body's fault that I'm getting into shitty situations. Yeah.
I mean, talk about finding the silver linings in a situation. Right. But it is great. I mean, to hear the takeaway was like, hang on a second, like, I am worthy and valuable, and he's seeing something in me that I haven't necessarily even seen in myself, and that then being a turning point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And all of the, these things, these unfortunate things that's happened to me, I'm always like, I'm kind of happy that happened, because something really good came out of it. Not always, because I'm not a perfect human being, but there is like a definitely silver lining for this one for sure.
Yeah. And so with the move to Canada, I know you mentioned your sister was there. Was there also I'm going to go there, I'm going to reinvent myself, I'm going to it's a fresh start? Was it that kind of thing?
Yeah. Reinvent myself and become this great person. And, but going to Canada, there was a greater emphasis on being, quote unquote, hot. Like, I thought, I'm going to get a job in a bar to start out. And I realized that I couldn't get a job in a bar because I wasn't, quote unquote, attractive enough. Because in Canada, in Vancouver, all of the bars, the waitresses or the wait staff, they have to look a certain way. And that's not the case in England. In the UK, you can, anyone can pull pints, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, and in Vancouver as well, it's very kind of yoga, health food, fat phobic, basically. And so then there was that kind of like, I'm really, really unattractive. In England, I could get by because, I had a good personality and whatnot. But here I'm like, my jokes aren't landing with the Canadians as well, and they don't understand what I'm saying as much. And, and also I'm really very, very unattractive according to them.
Yeah. And so I guess like hearing that can kind of go one of two ways, where there's some kind of death spiral of like pity and feeling bad about yourself, or you then double down on your new realization of like, no, I am really worthy, and kind of going more in that direction.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because of the previous experience, I realized that I probably wasn't going to get a thin body, although that didn't stop me from trying for at least the next few years, and that there was something else going on. And that's when I then started therapy in Canada. And that was my long journey to getting to this place where I am today. But getting to this place where I think that my fat body is okay and that I think that diets don't work was probably the final step. Like everything else in my life was really good. Like I'd worked out the trauma, and learned how to have healthy relationships and set boundaries and all that type of stuff. But I was still like, but I'm fat. Like, can't I just become thin? Can't I? I'm so good at everything else. Can't I just become thin?
Yeah.
And that was the last thing to fall into place.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because I think a lot of the time it's the other way around for a lot of people, especially often when people are getting over eating disorders as well. There's this idea of like, okay, once I stop the dieting, or once I recover, then everything in my life is going to be great. And it's normally like, oh no, that's normally when the work on the trauma or the setting of the boundaries, or like all of the other life stuff then starts to come in. And so you've in a sense done it in the reverse order, where that was then like the last remaining piece to deal with.
Yeah. And I feel that because when you're living in a fat body, it's very unlikely that someone's going to say to you, hey, by the way, do you know it's not your body that's a problem? That you don't need to lose weight. More often, you're going to have people say, do you know what, it's a really good idea for you to lose weight. And even if you are in an eating disorder, that a lot of the time is encouraged. And so it's very difficult to know that dieting behavior is not helpful when the whole world is telling you, if you have a fat body, that it is, and it's good for you.
Yeah. And what about with your sister? So what was like her relationship with food like? What was her body like? What was her like just general life skills like? Was it going over and seeing someone who had all their shit together, and so you're like, cool, I want to emulate this? Or was there a lot of her going through her own life journey and trying to figure things out?
Yeah, so my sister, she's a couple of years younger than me, and in my family, I'm one of six. Hang on, six. God, there's so many of us. And so I was the second youngest, and so I feel like my older siblings, they got the brunt of the disordered, lessons and shit. The shit, because they lived with my dad longer. And I was, I don't know, maybe 6 when my mum divorced my dad. So me and my sister, I maybe had 6 years of it. My sister maybe had 4 years. And so I see myself as, fucked up a bit, from my childhood. And then my sister had a lot less, because she had 2 years less. And so she was the one who was more well balanced, of course, still affected by diet culture. She's straight size, and she always has been around straight size. She didn't have that same issues around food, so she was very kind of stable. And so whereas I don't know if I recognized that she was stable. So I didn't necessarily think I want to be like her. I guess, but now I'm like, oh no, she was nice to have someone who wasn't, really unstable, to be really good. I was really, I'm really close with her. So that was lucky for me. Yeah.
And so when you got over there, you said that bartending was out. So what work were you then doing?
So then I went into recruitment, and I got a job with some dodgy company that I was like, oh, no one's going to hire me because I'm so ugly. But that wasn't true. So I did recruitment. And so then I spent the next 9 years in recruitment.
Okay. And so at what point did you then start to make the transition into the body acceptance and wanting to then kind of coach and be in this field working?
Yeah, so it was probably, I've had my business for 5 or 6 years now. So it would have been a couple of years before that, after all of that therapy, that I saw Reagan Chastain's blog Dances with Fat.
Yeah.
I don't know how the hell I saw this. I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I saw this, and on her blog, it was the message, it's okay to be fat. And I was like, what the fuck? Who is this person? No, it's not okay to be fat, but I'm going to read some more. And I just remember the moment lying on my bed, reading my phone, saying to my then boyfriend, being like, did you know this? And did you know that diets don't work? And did you know that, you can be fat and healthy? And he was just like, whatever. And it was like a life-changing moment for me. And from then, I became obsessed with this because it was the missing thing that I was looking for. I was just like, why can't I just become thin and therefore good? Like I had been working for years to get this feeling of being there, wherever there was. And I realized that I was kind of going about it the wrong way. And the concept that you could live in a fat body and it'd be okay was not even something that I'd ever heard of, and so it became an obsession of mine to spread that word. And so at that time I had begun coaching people for career related stuff and writing resumes and things like that on the side when I was doing my full-time job, and then became an adjunct professor teaching job type stuff, and so then I trained to be a coach, and Fierce Fatty was born. It wasn't actually Fierce Fatty. My business was originally Manpower Life, but the concept of Fierce Fatty was born. About 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I've been unstoppable since.
Did you then, like off the back of Regan Chastain, it's then that you found Health at Every Size and intuitive eating, and that kind of just all spawned from there?
Yeah, everything. I was like voracious. I was just consumed everything I could about this topic.
Yeah. And so then how did the TEDx talk come about?
I like talking, and it turns out that I'm pretty good at it, actually, even though I was terrified to do it for a long time. It was another thing that I just wanted to tell the world, hey, listen up here, and did you know it's okay to be fat? And so I learned how to speak. So I did a course about how to speak, and also then how to get a TEDx speaking opportunity, and applied to my local TEDx, and after a lot of effort and whatnot, got through and did the TEDx.
Wow. And how was it in terms of putting the talk together? Did you know when you were starting to apply of like, this is clearly what I want to cover in the talk, or they gave it to you and you're like, shit, okay, now I need to think of something to cover? Like, how prepared were you when you started to apply?
Oh, you have to be 100% prepared. You have to basically know your whole talk from start to finish. And so you submit a 2-minute video with the concept you're going to be talking about. And it has to be really, really good, because they get loads of applications, a person just, talking to the camera being like, yeah, I just want to talk about happiness or whatever. And so it has to be very well thought out. And so the whole e-course that I did a whole e-course on just how to do that 2-minute video for the application, because that's how all TEDx applications are, is pretty much all of them. You do the 2-minute video, and then it's so many different stages, and then you do like a 2-minute talk, and you're not accepted at that point, and then you do like a 5-minute talk, and you're still not accepted, and I think you then did a 10-minute talk, and then you got accepted to actually do it. But the TEDx that I did was like a prestigious one. There's some TEDx where they're just like, you'll do, anyone can do it. So I'm lucky that my one was one of the best, because it meant that the quality of the talk that I delivered was a lot higher because of that.
Nice. And where was it filmed? Was that in Vancouver?
In Vancouver, yeah, TEDx Vancouver, yeah. And it was in front of 2,800 people, and I think it's being viewed now on the online maybe 130,000 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
How was it on the day? Were you nervous?
You know what? I wasn't, which is,
Okay.
and I'd have moments where I'd be like, oh shit, because I was the final speaker because I had a big reveal at the end, and my talk was like the highest energy one, and so
Yeah.
I had to listen to all of the other speakers first, and I had a very like an attitude of what's the worst that can happen? Like I thought the worst that can happen is that I forget my words, and there's 2,600 people there that will see me forget my words, and whatever, it's not that big a deal. When they do the filming, they can cut it together and make it look like I knew what I was saying. And then I thought, okay, what else is bad that could happen? I could shit myself. On stage. So I was wearing a dress, so if I shit myself, everyone would see. And so I thought, well, if I do shit myself, then could I survive it? Would it be a funny story? Would I then be able to maybe do a TEDx talk the next year about how I try to do a TEDx talk and I shit my pants? Probably, And so I just thought, well, the worst that can happen, I can survive it. And the best that can happen, that'll be pretty cool. So
Yeah.
I was just really excited. And I had practiced the talk about 50 billion times, and so I wasn't going to forget my words, and I didn't feel like I needed to shit myself, so I wasn't going to shit myself, and that didn't happen. It went pretty well.
Nice. And were you in the final on the day? Are you happy with how it all came out?
On the day, yes. Now, a couple of years later, no, because I've evolved in those last couple of years, and there's certain things that I would tweak and change, and I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't say that word, and I wish I did this and that or whatever. But yeah, no, at the on the day, I'd say it was one of like the best experiences of my life, standing on stage at the end with my arms in the air and the audience giving me a standing ovation and just being like, revel in me. Yes, this is amazing. Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Nice. And just from a business perspective, how helpful has it been for you in terms of getting clients or being able to market with, hey, I've done a TEDx and here is the video of that TEDx talk?
I think it's hard to quantify. I think saying, oh, that you're a TEDx speaker, people think that you have a certain amount of intelligence, question mark.
Yeah.
It gives you some sort of level of authority, I guess. But people watching my talk, it's a really good invitation and a really good introduction into who I am. But I wouldn't say that, when my TEDx talk came out, the next day I had like hundreds of people being like, take my money. It wasn't like that. It was more of a slow burn, and it was a more of a, here, this is what I believe in. And if you like it, then come and join me on this journey. So it was kind of like, it was more of a slow burn type of thing.
Okay. And it was a TEDx that then led on to the BBC show, the Who Are You Calling Fat?
Yes, it did. Yeah. So that's a good point. Like that did, lead to that opportunity, because they watched my TEDx, and then the BBC contacted me and said, hey, do you want to be on this TV show?
Talk a little about that TV show. I haven't watched it, so I know of it, but I never actually got to watch it, and I've obviously heard your commentary on it. But yeah, talk about what it was and what the experience was like.
Yeah, so last year I was approached by the BBC. They wanted to do they called it a social experiment, where they had a house, and in the house there were 9 people who are fat, plus size, bigger bodied, various ways to describe themselves.
Yeah.
And some of the people liked being fat, and some of them didn't. And then there was a couple who were like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just fat and whatever. I'm here for the ride. And so there was a guy who had stomach amputation surgery, and there was a person who was working to eradicate fatness, and there was a guy that had diabetes and then went on a diet and reduced his symptoms. And then there was a plus size male model. There was a fat club promoter. There was me. There were some other fabulous fat people. Anyway, and so we all lived in a house for 10 days, and every day we spoke about what we thought about fatness. We did different activities, and every day there was an activity led by one person. And so the days where the people who didn't like being fat, their activities were things like getting a doctor to come in to tell us that we're all going to die any minute, and getting us someone else to come in and tell us that we're all about to get type 2 diabetes, and really fun things, really fun experiences. And then the people who liked themselves, we did activities that were a little bit more fun, I guess, because we don't think it's bad to be fat. And so my activity was to go into the city centre, which was Oxford, and do a little bit of fat activism, which was standing in my bikini with a blindfold and a board that said, "I'm standing for those who don't love their bodies. If you think that we should love all bodies, draw a heart on my body," and invited the rest of the house to join me, and a couple of others did. And nice. That was pretty cool. It was like an emotional TV moment, lots of, people crying and stuff. And because the public were very nice, and no one threw, empty Coke cans at us or anything like that, which is what I worried that might happen.
Yeah.
And there was lots of discussions, and we all got on pretty well. It was draining to be around fat phobes for that long and have to say, hey, fat people deserve to live. That was difficult. And also wonderful to spend time with people who were so fat positive as well. So it was quite the experience.
And when it was pitched to you, did it deliver in terms of, okay, this is what I thought I was getting myself into, or it was kind of a bit of like a bait and switch where you're like, hang on a second, this is not what I really signed up for. This does not feel like what was on the description.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag. It was a real mixed bag. So the way that it was presented to me was we want to show the reality of living in a fat body and show the world what body positivity is about. And so I was like, that's pretty cool. Yeah, pretty amazing. And the BBC has to be very centrist in the views that they express.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I had considered, because I thought, it's becoming more centrist to not be a bigot, not hate fat people. And it's becoming more normalized to say, oh, being fat, that's a complex issue, versus, oh, all those fat people, all they do is eat pies,
Yeah.
And so they were like, yeah, we're really interested in making something that is, forward thinking and thought provoking and is different from all of those exploitative shows about fat people.
Yeah. So like nuance.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And the thing is, we all got on pretty well, and that doesn't make good television. And so they had to manufacture a couple of, tension-filled moments, and it looked like, people were getting angry when they weren't, or it looked like people were rolling their eyes when they weren't, like a lot of kind of cutting and pasting, things like that. And I thought, the BBC don't do that. The BBC do that. Like, obviously not as bad as, say Real Housewives or something. But, you'd have, and cutting audio to make it, like, they have to cut audio anyway, because they only have 2 hours, like it's 2 1-hour shows. They only have 2 hours to get in all of this information. So they have to cut audio anyway, but cutting some audio to make it sound like I had these extreme beliefs. For example, there's one bit where I'm talking about that health is a social construct, and there is no final destination when it comes to health. Like, you're not, you don't arrive at this health status where you are perfectly healthy and your health is never going to change and that's it, black and white, you're healthy you're good, you're unhealthy, you're bad. It's like a binary system that we look at in society. We believe in society, and it's not helpful, versus looking at health as a spectrum. And so that's the nuanced conversation. And so in the final product is me saying, health is a social construct. I don't believe in health. And then, like, to people listening, it's like, what do you mean you don't believe in health? Like, there's something wrong with you? Like, what's not to believe in health? And so it makes it more interesting to not have that nuanced view. But also there were some really lovely positive moments. And it was very clear that the people who liked their bodies were happy and were having fun. And the people who didn't were punishing themselves and were a lot of times quite sad. So, I wanted it to be a lot more radical.
Yeah.
In reality, I should have known that it couldn't have been. It was a real kind of mixed bag of good and bad and somewhere in the middle.
Okay. And do you think they tried to turn the volume up on kind of everything in terms of the people who were dieting and were meant to be looking sad, they made it look even more sad because then it created this real contrast?
Actually, no. I think they turned up the volume on the fat positive people to make them look like they were greedy, only eating chips, lazy, that type of thing, and made the people who were working out and doing that kind of made them look more inspirational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And it's never a good thing to check comments, but what was then the reception when it came out?
It was a real mixed bag. Like, I knew that already. Being a fat person on TV, you're going to get comments. And being a fat person who thinks it's okay to be fat, then you're going to get even more comments. So I got a lot of wonderful, supportive, kind comments, people saying this is really amazing. And I got a lot of people saying, you're killing people, I'm going to kill you, you're a piece of shit, all of the usual things as a fat person on the internet.
And were there things that you said that you hoped to get across that were then in the final cut where you're like, I really want people to understand about weight stigma, or I really want people to understand about shame, and I like, there were certain things you're like, I really hope that they keep this in because I think this is a strong message that I have that isn't being talked about in the way that it should be?
Yeah, like the idea about shame, that was there, and the idea about the complexity of fatness and that diets don't work and that fat people are not a monolith. So those things were definitely in there.
Okay. Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I watch a lot of documentaries, and I'm always trying to think of, okay, who are the people putting this together? What is the narrative that they're trying to tell, and trying to get a sense of, okay, is it that they had a bit of an idea in mind and then they film someone and then off the back of that, they kind of let the people and the film sort of talk for itself? Or was it like, we have this idea in mind and then we're going to film enough stuff so that we can put it together to tell the exact narrative that we want to be able to tell?
Yeah, I think like they kind of just they didn't know what was going to happen, so they just filmed us. And then afterwards they said, what story do we want to tell with the footage that we have? Because there were so many stories that they could have told, but they didn't. Like, I was like, oh, I know exactly how this is going to play out. Like, there was one guy in the house that everyone hated, and he was really inappropriate and said like creepy sexual innuendo stuff, and everyone was like, oh god, this guy's gross. And then he like threatened to leave and was like really rude to the production team, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to see the footage of him doing that. And then when it came out, there was nothing about that at all, and I was like, damn it, what the heck? Because I was like, I can't wait for him to realize that he's a massive knob. And then he came out looking okay in the footage, like totally neutral, and I was like, oh man. And there was a couple of others too that I was like, oh, that's going to look really good. But that's not the story that they chose. They chose a different story.
Wow. And did you have to sign something where basically, you have no control over final edits or anything along those lines?
Yep. So that's it. You sign your soul away, and you don't get paid either.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
which I think is so much of television these days in terms of reality TV. It is something that is made for a fraction of what it costs to produce a normal television show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like that. Well, you're going to get exposure, and that's why I did it, because it was like, millions of people are going to see this, and millions of people did. But at what cost? Like, it really affected my mental health negatively, so that I know in the future, is exposure worth no compensation? And for me, if I know that it's going to be a hostile environment, then I think, nah, it's not. Like a couple of weeks ago, I got invited to go on a BBC debate show, and I was like, are you going to pay me? And they said, oh yeah, we'll pay you like 150 quid. And I was like, lols, like 150 quid, like, for millions. And it was a debate with, there's a TV doctor who's like really fat phobic. I can't remember his name, but he spouts like, 300 calorie diet books and shit like that. And I thought, is my mental health worth that? And I thought, that exposure, and I thought, nah. So I just didn't go on. So.
Yeah. And I guess there's a difference, like with the exposure with the TEDx talk, you have control over it in terms of, I am writing every aspect of this, I'm creating it the way that I want it to be. And yes, sure, they might edit out some little bits, but they're not editing out anything apart from maybe you fumbling over some words. Like, people are going to see what you wanted people to see. Whereas in something like that, you're at the mercy of the person who is doing the questioning. You're at the mercy of how much time you then have. So you can end up sitting there, and in the end you've spoken for 2.5 minutes, and it then just gets framed where you look like you don't know what you're talking about. And if the agenda is really, we need to tell the story that everyone needs to be losing weight and that this is a big health crisis, then you're not really going to be able to say what you want to be able to say in the way that you would on a longer form content, or where you have more control.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm quite wary of all that, media now. I'm like, do I have control? Then nah, I'm not that interested.
Yeah. And so, did it kind of knock you around a bit after the documentary, and it took a while to kind of get over it?
It did, it did. And that was very surprising, because I feel like I'm quite a stable person now, and I have, high self-esteem, and I know my worth is not dictated by what people think about me. But when you have 2 to 3 million people in the UK and worldwide watching you, and even to say 10% think that I'm a massive knob, knowing that there is, 300,000 people out there, 200,000 people out there who think that I'm the biggest knob ever, which is a lot of people's reaction, is hard, right?
Yeah.
And I like to think, oh no, I'm never affected by people's opinions, but of course I'm a human being, and I was, and that was difficult for me, which was surprising. But it just goes to show that, even when you do so much work on this stuff, you still need to protect your mental health, and you're still a living, breathing human being that can be affected by big things. And, being on television is a big thing. So I had to take, that came out in November, I had to take all of December off to just not look at social media, and, take time away, and then start afresh in January, to overcome it.
Yeah. And I guess with like so much of social media, it is the most extreme percentage of most extreme ends of the spectrum where people are the most vocal. And so, you may have received lots of lovely comments of people saying, hey, this is amazing. You've changed my worldview. I love this. This is exactly what I need to hear. But then you also get like the most angry people who are then reaching out and telling you all the ways of why you were wrong. Even if it's a tiny percent, you're still receiving that message after message after message. So I think you have to be pretty thick-skinned to be able to deal with that.
It's like getting a message. Like, imagine if someone was to like send a message to you like every hour on the hour, being like, "Hey, Chris, you're a piece of shit." Like, eventually, by the end of the week, you were like, "Am I a piece of shit? Oh my god!" You know. But then, you do become get thicker skin, which is unfortunate. You shouldn't have to, but what really got me was feeling like I let down the fat positive, body positive community because I wasn't perfect, and that I didn't exactly portray everything perfectly, which was an unrealistic expectation that I had put on myself. So, you know, thinking I had this opportunity to make everyone think that body positivity was absolutely 100% perfect and the best, and, you know, and that didn't happen. It was still good, but, you know, so that's what really got me, was thinking that I'd let my team down because fuck the bigots. I don't care what they think. But obviously I do as well.
Of course. I guess if it's like, and maybe there was nothing you could have done to deal with that. I mean, you didn't have final edit. There were probably lots of things that you said over those 10 days that if it was edited together was the perfect thing that your team wanted them to say. But you weren't in the edit suite.
Yes. You know what, Chris, that is exactly right. You're right. Like, I did say all the perfect things, but they, you know, their agenda wasn't, let's make Victoria look perfect. You know, their agenda was, let's make it entertaining.
Yeah.
I
want to chat about one of the things that you recently did a podcast on, which is cults and comparing diet culture to a cult. And I said this before we actually started recording, like, this is actually a topic I really wanted to do a podcast on myself about, because cults is something that is really of an interest to me, and the idea of diet culture being a cult, or even having an eating disorder and being under the spell of the eating disorder, being in a cult. And so when I saw you do an episode on this, I was like both happy and disappointed, where I was like, damn it, you've beaten me to the punch on this. But I really want to go through this because I think it's a really helpful thing for people to start to understand.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you can still do an episode. Like, we'll have totally different viewpoints, right? Like, so I think you need an episode on cults and diet culture on your own. I'm telling you now. But this is it's really interesting. I'm like I mentioned before, I'm into true crime and psychology and all that type of stuff. And in that umbrella is cults. And the more that I was watching documentaries and listening to podcasts and whatnot about cults, I was like, oh my God, diet culture is a fucking cult.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Before we get into that, what have been the documentaries or the podcasts or the cults that have most, I don't know, was most entertaining, or entertaining is probably the wrong word, were most fascinating to them listen to? Do you know what I
love? Have you heard about Nexium?
Yes. Okay. Yes. I listened to that podcast.
Oh, and I think they've got a whole the new episode came out a couple of weeks ago. I forgot about it. On HBO, there's like a 6 or 8 part thing that's come out recently about Nexium, and it's loads of insider stuff. And it interests me because it's one of the whistleblowers is from Vancouver, so I'm like, I could totally see how I could fall for a cult, especially like something like Nexium, which is all about self-development. And I can see how you could slowly kind of be like, oh shit, I'm in a cult. But, you know, diet culture is, you know, very, very closely resembles cults. And looking into it and looking at what cults do and how they control people, and looking at the points, I'm like, yep. You know, tick, 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 tick on diet culture.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I was interested in when I started to get into it, because I think from early on, if you haven't had any exposure to it and you be kind of naive, you think, what are these idiots getting duped into? Like, how unintelligent must you be to fall into this trap? And then you actually look into it, and it's people across all walks of life who are highly educated, have huge amounts of money, through to people who are really in the midst of struggle. Like, I think there is this idea that people are kind of unintelligent and duped. And I really get a sense that that is not the case. Like, yes, there's often people who are damaged or have had trauma or things going on in their life, but I don't think it's always just that simple.
No, it's not. And I think the common theme is people who are seeking. They're seeking something, and that is universal. So many of us are seeking something, and and I think maybe even if you're curious and you're looking outside of the box, that you could easily fall for any type of cult. Easily.
Yeah. Did you watch Wild Wild Country?
Yes. Yeah, that was really good, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was really, really well put together on the Rognishi, and who then became Osho. Really, really well done documentary that's on Netflix. That if you haven't watched it, I'd highly recommend. But it was my slight annoyance with that was I would have liked to see more about the day-to-day insides of what it was like for the regular folks living there. It was a lot more kind of at the top levels and focusing on the politics and all that. But it was equally fascinating where I'm like, I can't believe I've never even heard of this. And there's a guy with 70 Rolls Royces and blowing things up and poisoning places. And it was truly fascinating.
Wild. Yeah. Wild Wild Country is a perfect name for it. Wild.
It is, definitely. Yeah. And so, tell, like, how did you then get into thinking, okay, let's make this analogy, and how did that start?
Yeah. So, something about the way that we look at cults. There's a guy called Stephen Hassan, and he developed a model called the BITE model that describes the methods that cults use to recruit people and to keep them in the cult. And so BITE is an acronym, and it stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. So behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. So cults are really smart. And when we look at cults, like we were mentioning, sometimes you can think, how could someone be duped by this? Well, a cult doesn't come along and be like, hey, we are going to ruin your life. We're going to take your money. We're going to make you feel like you're a piece of shit. Come and join us, because everyone will be like, no, thank you. They start out really shiny and glittery, and then they devalue you, and you're stuck because you don't think that you can leave, and also you think that what you've learned is true. So if we go into some of the things under each one of these things, I'll share a couple of things, and if people want to know more, they can listen to my episode or listen to your episode that's going to come out whenever, so that you can see how kind of similarity. So the BITE model, it lists under each one different things that the cult will do to recruit and to keep people in the cult. So under behavior, something they do is regulate diet, food and drink, hunger, and or fasting. That is very diety. Another thing, major time spent with group indoctrination and rituals and or self-indoctrination, including the internet. When we're in a diet, we spend so much time learning about what foods we can eat, what foods we can't eat, the way that we need to be moving our body, consuming all these all this information online, all these before and after pictures, all that type of stuff. I was obsessed with only reading diet bullshit when I was dieting.
Yeah.
Next, rewards and punishments used to modify behaviors, both positive and negative. What is a better reward than seeing that you have lost weight? What is a more powerful punishment than having to see that you have gained weight, especially if you're in a group and they're weighing you and it's like, oh, put on weight this week. The shame. Oh, that's a motivator. Next, under this behavior control, we've got impose rigid rules and regulations, like Hello, that's dieting. And instill dependency and obedience. Diets tell us that we have been unsuccessful at feeding ourselves. That is why we are fat. That is why we need to lose weight. Listen to them and their diet, which is the almighty secret. Then you'll become thin. So that's just the behavior control. Do you want me to continue?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, if I then, I mean, you're doing it through diet culture. If I am doing it through the lens of an eating disorder, I mean, the same thing happens. So regulation of an individual's physical reality. I mean, you start having someone restricting, and it starts to mess with their reality of the world and starts to mess with their brain. There's another one, like how much sleep the person is able to have. You start restricting someone's food, it starts messing with the quality of their sleep, the amount of sleep that they're able to get. There's another one with like need for obedience and dependency. And so with the eating disorder, you are having to exercise a certain amount a day, or you're only allowed a certain amount of calories a day. And so there then becomes this like overlord in your mind telling you what you're allowed to or not allowed to do. And so, yeah, in the same ways, I think diet culture fits in. For each of these, I can go through and be like, hey, this is like the eating disorder thoughts that so many of the clients have in their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like reading all of them, because I'm just like picking out a few here and there, but there's so many. You're just like, yep. Like, hello, this is like to the T. What's going on with diet culture and with eating disorders.
Yeah. So next one is like information control.
Information control. So the first one in here is deception. So this is a massive one. Deception. There has never once in the history of the world been a study to show that any diet works long term. Never. When I tell people this, they can't believe it. It's like, of course, there must be. Yeah, there's tons of studies to show that a diet can work short term and you can lose weight temporarily. Of course, you can do that, no problem. But there's literally no way that they are providing information. They're withholding information. So this diet is saying, come to us and you'll lose weight. That is deception, because you probably won't. Statistics show that you're probably going to stay the same weight, or you're going to weigh more. And then under here we have distort information to make it more acceptable, and systematically lie to the cult member. Like, this is a big one. This diets are based on lies. And it's bonkers to me that any diet company can be in business, really. It's like, imagine if any type of company was manufacturing something or making something and the product didn't work, then, it'd be shut down for fraud. But anyway, compartmentalize information into outsider versus insider doctrines. So when I was dieting, it was very kind of like, I am the good dieter and everyone else who's not dieting is wrong and bad and stupid and lazy. I have taken control of my life and I'm doing the good things, and I am going to listen to the diet and do what I'm told and be obedient, not like those lazy, stupid non-dieters, and especially lazy, stupid fat people. Yeah. And another one from this one is extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda, including newspapers, magazines, blah, blah, blah. So there is the propaganda that diet culture puts out there is exhausting. I get rid of all of it from my social media, but still it creeps in. Still I am, have this information put in front of me of before and afters, and you should eat this or not eat that, and blah blah blah. So that's information control in the bite. And
even just when you are trying to listen to a podcast out in the real world, or just read a newspaper out in the real world, like it's not even like, oh, I at some point subscribe to this thing and I really need to unsubscribe because I'm no longer following that way of thinking. It's like, no matter where you turn, it becomes like nigh impossible to avoid it.
Yeah, it is. Like, just listen to podcasts. So many of my favorite podcasts, they have Noom as a sponsor. And I'm just like, oh, for fuck's sake, I'm trying to listen to murder here. I don't want to hear about losing weight. Like, God, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so, yeah, from my end, in terms of like distorting information to make it acceptable or deliberately holding back information, I mean, that's definitely the case with eating disorders, where once people start to recover, they realize how much of their life they were missing out on and how much their life is now genuinely better. But that's not what their eating disorder was telling them. It was telling them that if they did gain weight or they did change the way that they're eating, that, yeah, their life was going to be so much worse. And that's definitely not what they then experience when they're out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Misquotations, statements taken out of context from non-cult sources. So yeah, there's always just this, especially when you talk about, like, I mean, we talked earlier about like health, having a conversation around health, you're getting this really like one-dimensional view of health that is very much guided by the eating disorder and distorting information that is out there in terms of what is actually healthy and how complex it is, and looking at physical health and mental health and emotional health and all of the different components. And there's just, yeah, like you were misquoted on your documentary, misquoted because you lop off the start of a sentence and the end of a sentence, and it then gives it a completely different meaning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think about as well now diet companies trying to take body positivity and taking body positivity out of context and using that to continue to control people in the diet, because then they're like, oh, this is going to help you love your body. Yeah. And obviously it won't.
Yeah. Okay, so then thought control is the next one.
Yeah, so the first one on here is require members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth. And we see this all the time, whatever diet that people are doing, they're like, oh, well, if you do paleo, or if you do, what's that one, you don't eat carbs, Atkins or whatever. Yeah, like all these stupid things. Like, this is the one that's gonna, you're gonna lose weight, and this is, magical things are gonna happen, and you can't convince them otherwise, because they have taken that doctrine as truth, and changing their thoughts. Another one is teaching thought-stopping techniques which shut down reality testing by stopping negative thoughts and allowing only positive thoughts, including denial, rationalization, justification, wishful thinking. And so for me, this makes me think about denying the reality of what it is like to be on a diet. Really fucking hungry, really miserable, having to change so many things about your life because you can't eat certain foods, missing out on events and occasions, and saying and convincing yourself this is good, this is to make me better, even though the reality is that it's shit.
Yeah.
It's really shit.
Yeah, which is the same as with the eating disorder. It works in the exact same way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Next, we have rejection of rational analysis, critical thinking, and constructive criticism. Because this is another one. Like, we have the evidence to show that dieting isn't helpful, but we can't. When you're in it, you can't see that evidence. Labeling alternative belief systems as illegitimate, evil, or not useful. This is interesting because the amount of times I've been called evil for saying that you don't need to diet is really interesting. Like, it's immoral to not diet in some people's eyes. And they really do believe it. Like, they really do think that I am destroying people's lives because I'm not in their diet cult. And finally, instill a new map of reality. So this is what you were mentioning before again about that magical thinking. Like, if you stay in this cult, if you stay on this diet, then you're going to become thin, and then it's going to be rainbows and fairy tales and all wonderful things are going to happen. And so when it does feel a bit shit, then you can think about, well, what is the future going to hold? Because it's going to be okay. It's going to be better in the future. But, that doesn't come to fruition because it's all a big lie.
Yeah. And is it when you were talking about the thought-stopping techniques to shut down the reality testing, the Nexium podcast definitely comes to mind with that, in terms of just how manipulative they were with language and really, really trying to force someone to always see the positive in things, and which on the surface sounds like a really good thing, but it is demonstrated in that podcast just how manipulative it then was. I'm blanking on the actual podcast name that had the 6 or 7 part series. Toxic Positivity. No, in terms of the Nexium podcast. But I will put it in the show notes so that people can listen to it. But yeah, the toxic positivity, definitely. Yeah, talk about that.
And that is actually, that's the name of a podcast which talks about cults, but talks about MLMs. Do you know about MLMs?
Yes.
Oh, fucking love. This is another thing I love, MLMs. And Nexium was an MLM as well. And that toxic positivity of, don't question anything, because if you question anything about the leader, about the system, then you are just being negative. And then being negative is the reason why you're in that situation. So you better stop being negative, because that is what's holding you back. And it's gaslighting, because you're not actually being negative. You're actually being, a normal human being and saying, hey, this doesn't feel good. And people are like, when they're gaslighting and toxic positivity-ing you, they're denying your reality and telling you that you're wrong to feel the way that you do, which is fucked up, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, with the MLMs, so it's multi-level marketing is what MLM stands for, in case someone's wondering. John Oliver did a really great segment on it, but there was also a documentary. Have you seen Betting on Zero?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I love that. Yeah. Oh, I love that stuff. The podcast is called The Dream. Is that the one you're talking about?
No, it's not. It's a Canadian one. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just looking at all of my podcasts that I've got on here.
I will find it and I can put it in the show notes if people are interested in it. But it was like a 6-part series or something that they then later on, there was then an update episode and then another update episode as more information came out as part of the court proceedings and everything. And it is truly fascinating / horrifying.
You should listen to that one though, the Dream, because that is about oh, for God's sake, MLMs. Oh.
Yeah. And so then the final one, which is then the emotional control.
Yeah, so emotional control. The first thing on here is manipulate and narrow the range of feelings. So some emotions or needs are deemed as evil, wrong, or selfish. So feeling hungry, emotions like fearing that the diet won't work. What do I do when I do lose weight? Do I have to do this forever? All of these kind of emotions and needs that are natural. Is that toxic positivity again? Saying, it's not. Don't listen to yourself. Don't listen to what your body is telling you and what your intuition is telling you. Next, make the person feel that problems are always their own fault, never the leader or the group's fault. And this is massive. It's not that the diet failed. You failed is what they tell you. You failed. It's not that our product is broken. You're the one that, quote unquote, fell off the wagon. It's your fault. If you followed it, you would be thin. And that is not true. Next, we have promote feelings of guilt or unworthiness. Like, hello. So you're not living up to your potential. Your past and your family and your thoughts and feelings are wrong. Everything is wrong. Social guilt, and that's a big thing of looking back and being like, when I was fat and horrible, I would do things like eat this. I was such a bad person. Oh my God. And really that's you being a normal human being, but making you feel like you're a bad person. Next we have instill fear. And that is massive. How many people are literally afraid of food, afraid because what diet cultures tell them, this food is going to do this to you. This food is unhealthy. And fear about what happens if I do eat this food, who will I become? Extreme highs and lows, right? That is diet culture.
Yeah.
Ritualistic and sometimes public confessions of sins. Like when you go to a meeting saying, I gained weight this week. Oh, what did you eat? What did you do? Oh dear, very bad, very bad. This is a big one. Like this whole emotional control is like diet culture to the T. Every single one. It's really it's a big one. It's very kind of like, puts the nail in the coffin that diet culture is a cult.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, same if I'm doing it through the lens of eating disorder being a cult. So like manipulate and narrow the range of a person's feelings. I mean, that's can often be the reason people do it in terms of it helps to numb them. And then they're like, okay, well, this is actually beneficial, at least beneficial to start with, because I was having to deal with all of this other stuff, having to deal with life. And now I'm not, because it's just really narrowing the band, and that then becomes a problem. But it definitely works in inverted commas for that. Make the person feel like if there's ever a problem, it's their fault. Well, that's the same if someone eats more than what they deemed appropriate, or if they don't exercise the amount that they should, or they actually want to try and get out, and there's any problems with that and there's uncomfortableness with that, well, that's obviously the person's fault. There's use of guilt and use of fear, which is, I mean, if you eat the wrong things, you feel guilty. If you try and eat certain foods that are now off menu for what you have deemed you're allowed yourself, there's a huge amount of fear that rises up. There's one for programming of irrational fears of ever leaving the group. And I think that's a huge one as people are trying to get over their eating disorder. And this is the case even when there is a rational take on, I can see that this is detrimental. Like I can see I do not want this as part of my life. And yes, there is some benefit to it in terms of it's helping me in this moment, or it's helping me in this way or that way, because nothing's 100% unhelpful, because if it was 100% unhelpful, someone wouldn't be doing it. But it is manipulated and the stakes are set up in a way that someone believes that if I try and leave this, I am going to lose so much. And so I can see the pain that this is creating, but it's like better the devil you know.
Yes. And that final point in this group, emotional control, is so powerful. That phobia indoctrination, the irrational fears about what is going to happen. So especially if you are a fat person, no happiness or fulfillment possible outside the group. If you're fat, your life is over. You're not going to get a partner. You're not going to have kids. You're not going to be happy or fulfilled. And what are the consequences? The consequences of being fat is death, is what we're told. Fat people die. And so how hard is it to leave when you think the consequences are death? Because, you've been told that irrational fear, which, because of weight stigma can be rational for a lot of people. But isn't that a massive control? Like stay, even if it's shit, because if you don't, you'll be dead. So You know?
And if not real dead, you're dead socially. You're a pariah. No one's going to want to have you around. Like all of the things that then start to come up in your mind because that's the cult that you've been living in.
Yeah, powerful stuff.
It is. And so, I mean, we've only touched on some of these, but I'll put a link to the BITE model in the show notes. And I do recommend people going in and checking it out and having a think through, especially if you are someone who has a long history of dieting, or you are someone who is struggling with an eating disorder, and seeing it through that lens and saying, okay, does this start to make sense? And makes sense for why I'm having such a challenging time trying to do something different. Because I think that's often the part where you're like, why do I feel so trapped and just unable to make a decision here, to do something different? Like I'm capable in so many other areas of my life, but this one just seems like so much of a struggle. And if the right choice was to change this, it would be an easy choice to make. And it's like, well, no, that's not the case. And this is the reason why it's not the case, because there's been all of these things that have happened that have then changed your worldview.
And the one thing which is different from most traditional cults and diet culture is that when you leave most traditional cults, it's difficult and terrible, and a lot of people lose their family and all that type of stuff. But they have the benefit of going out into the quote unquote real world where people say that cult was bad. Whereas leaving diet culture, you leave and people say that was good. You should keep doing it. And you're bombarded with stuff saying go back to the cult, not a safe space where you can heal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that is probably one of the differences. And I mean, I guess for people who are in the cult, if everyone they've ever known is in the cult, then it's hard, because when they try and leave, they have, in a sense, got their whole world telling them that what they're doing is wrong. But yeah, once they get further afield, it's different. And they do have then people telling them that, okay, yeah, it's so great that you're now out of this cult. And I guess in a sense, where people can then find that is through podcasts like this, or podcasts like yours, or the body positivity movement, or the fat acceptance movement, like where there is more people that are then saying this message. So you aren't some lone person doing this kind of crazy thing where you're like, no, there's a lot of numbers of people doing this and that are validating why I've made that choice.
Yeah.
So that's where the recording got cut. And as much as we tried, we couldn't get it to work again. So if you enjoyed this conversation and what Victoria had to say and want more of her website is fiercefatty.com. She has a podcast of the same name. Her Instagram is at fierce.fatty. And then Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube is all at fiercefatty. And then her LinkedIn is Victoria Welsby. As I said at the top, 7 Health is taking on clients for the final time this year, and there's just one spot left, well, at least at the time of this recording. If you are struggling with disordered eating, eating disorders, being stuck in quasi-recovery, wanting to get over dieting, wanting to conceive or got your period back, or really any of the topics that we cover as part of the show, I'd love to help. So you can head over to 7-health.com/help for more information. So that is it for this week's show. I will catch you next week. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you then.